Okay, thank y'all for joining us at the Ella Project for our latest webinar in our I Can Do That series. This is a little twist on that. We went with Can I Do That? Because it's a little bit of a conversation about asking permission to do things a little bit differently. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a very cool thing. It's a little bit different than some of the stuff that we've done in the past. And we have two very fantastic people to take us through that discussion, Mollie Quinlan-Hayes and Trey McIntyre, who will bring themselves in and introduce themselves as we move forward. For those of y'all who don't know, the Ella Project is a nonprofit organization located here in New Orleans, Louisiana. We see a lot of friends on the call from all over, and certainly a lot from here in our home city, and it's good to see all of y'all here. We provide pro bono legal services. My partner, Ashley Keaton, is also on the call. She runs our legal clinic, and we assist with all sorts of things, copyrights, trademark, contracts, nonprofit incorporation, conversation of this webinar, perhaps. Nonprofit dissolution, perhaps another conversation. Business incorporation, we have a separate patent wing. We do a series of webinars like this one. This is the third and the fourth of a series we've been doing here. Our next one is going to be on June 28th. It's going to be having an artist-run gallery with two artists from New Orleans, the glass artist Andy Pollock and the jeweler Forrest Bacigalupe. And they both come from a little different perspective, and I think that's going to be a neat one as well. If you are not signed up for our emails, please do so. You can do so at ellanola.org. That's ELLANOLA.org. You'll find out all the information about these upcoming forums and workshops. Our Facebook account works for that as well. Before we bring on Mollie and Trey, I'd like to bring in my friend, Heather Pontonio, who's been a great supporter of this series to talk about a conference that they have coming up in July and maybe some other things. So welcome, Heather. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jean, and thanks for having this webinar yet again today. I am with the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, and we are proud to support professional development for artists like this in these webinars all across the country. We also serve as the backbone for the Artists Thrive initiative. In a second, I'm going to drop in the chat more about Artists Thrive, but I do encourage you to take a look at the site. There's a survey there that you can do a self-assessment on where you're at and what you should be looking at for thriving. There's lots of resources. There's lots of stories from folks all across the country. The biggest thing you probably want to know is if it's all free, there's no registration, nothing you have to do to get it, and it's available to everyone across the country. In order to help roll this out and create conversation, we do host an annual summit that will be July 18 to 21 in Winston-Salem and also fully hybrid online. I will drop a link in the chat about that as well. But note that it's an affordable conference that encourages learning and sharing together. And some of the folks here on the call have joined because they are part of Artists Thrive or already registered to attend the summit. So we do encourage you to look at that. And finally, I'm just delighted to be here today because this conversation really models all that Artists Thrive is about. It's about artists taking control of their thriving career. So thanks to Ella Project for hosting it today.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure to do so. And it definitely wouldn't work without our illustrious panel here. I'm going to spotlight Mollie Quinlan-Hayes and Trey McIntyre. We're going to pin Mollie and we're going to pin Trey. So we'll have a little split screen going, which I think should work well for everyone. Mollie's been a veteran arts administrator, worked with South Arts, is now working with NCAPER, the National Coalition of Arts Presenters and Emergency Responders. I think I got that all right. Trey McIntyre, a longtime friend of the Ella Project, longtime friend in New Orleans as well. Did a lot of great work choreography and works with Preservation Hall down here. We've known him for many years. He's been a friend and supporter of ours. He's been doing some other interesting things lately that, in all honesty, are the conversations of some of our discussion today. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. You'll hear much more about Mollie and Trey in the conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Mollie, who's going to take us through today's conversation. Welcome, Mollie.
Great. Thank you very much, Jean, and welcome, everyone. I do, first of all, want to apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a bit of bronchitis, so doing a really bad Kathleen Turner impression today. But I'm really excited about this conversation, and I'll share a little bit more about why in a moment. But it's exciting to hear from Trey today, exquisite artist and art maker, and who has traveled a really interesting path and is willing today to share what that path has been like when he made some really significant shifts and transitions. And we're going to make time, lots of time at the end for those of you who have questions and want to be part of the conversation about how you thrive as your work evolves and changes over time. And so as Jean mentioned, please note those questions down, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. We are going to be talking about Trey's past and some changes that his company went through. But I thought it would be great to start, Trey, by asking you, what are you doing now? I mean, you've obviously come through the other side to a great place. So first of all, why don't you just tell us where you're doing, what you're doing now and where you're doing it?
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks so much, Molly, and thanks so much to Ella for hosting this discussion. It's a subject matter that when Jean first brought it up, I mentioned that I might be tired of talking about, but I think it's quite interesting that the subject matter takes on more meaning as life goes on and reveals itself in new ways. But to answer your question, coming out the other side, the bulk of my work has really been about returning to being a freelance choreographer and working with different companies and working with different groups. It's also afforded me, though, the possibility of working in other mediums, which is so interesting to me. As soon as the company finished, I made a documentary about the closing of the company and spent 2 years pouring through archival footage and really using it as a vehicle to think through what had happened. So moving into being a filmmaker and also in my work as a photographer, that's kind of the main thrust of my day right now. I'm working on a series that's intended to travel to smaller communities across the country. And it's a series of giant 7-foot tall portraits, lenticular portraits, which is actually kind of that like that grade school notebook kind of 3D animated with like, it has that kind of like ridged surface to it. I don't know if everybody had that in school, but I had one. But I'm making giant versions of that, and they're all reinvented male archetypes. Which is an examination of looking at masculinity and being male in contemporary society, and meant as an exploration of some more generative ways of expression as a man. And that also has dance components that are folded into it. So, I while having the company, was so interested in the merging of different mediums and blurring the lines between what's possible in each. And what's been afforded is a lot more time. I suppose on some level, ironically, a lot more time to be able to accomplish those things.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So let's do a little time travel backwards, and I'll share that I'm a Trey McIntyre fangirl from way back. Back in the aughts, as an arts administrator, there was all this talk bubbling up at conferences and with my colleagues about this very cool thing that was happening in Boise, Idaho. And this nationally known young hip choreographer had moved there with his company and was kind of making the city kind of a city renaissance. And so that was just very exciting in terms of kind of public policy and economic development through the arts and cultural placemaking. And then when I moved here to Atlanta, I was able to see the company and just fell in love with the work, the dances that you made with the company that was just so high energy and witty and fun dance to see. So why don't you tell us a little bit, for those who don't know about your company, how it started, how you started, and where you were back, in the late aughts, the early 2010s, while your company was kind of building and thriving at that point.
Yeah, I think, it's kind of the inevitable, not conclusion, but there's a point in a choreographer's career where, you're expected to consider having your own company of dancers. In all honesty, I had not been moving in that direction because I had not seen a lot of happy artistic directors. The examples were always, maybe artistically fulfilling, but, an endless amount of work. But, I had two collaborators in the early days of the company, Ann Mueller, who's on the staff at Ballet Idaho now, and John Michael Shirt, who was my partner through most of the history of the company. Really they're kind of bolstering me. And also, I had a lot of objections at the time, really, to how a dance company was run, and was really just listing things I didn't want to be the case. And they were both so supportive in, well, then why don't you make the company that you want to make? And so that was hard to argue with when I had that kind of support and backing. So, we began as a summer touring company where I would kind of put together my dream team, cherry picking dancers from the companies that I got to work with during the year. There are always one or two individuals that would stand out in terms of a really great and somewhat symbiotic working relationship. And so, putting together that group and coming together in the summer was a great opportunity. And, we developed a lot of momentum very quickly. The response to the company, I think not only what we put on stage, but our methods right away of being present and engaging with our community. And I think, things like having a national board. Since we didn't really have a home, we had people who supported us and were, bonded with the company in different communities. That helped create a lot of momentum. So, 3 years into it, presenters were saying, well, we'd love to present you, but, you don't have a company during the year. So if you ever did that, we'd love to bring you. So, it was kind of a strike while the iron was hot moment where the decision had to be made. And, that was very tantalizing at the time. And so we decided to endeavor to do that. And because we had been a virtual company, we really had the choice of deciding where our home would be. We weren't generated from one particular space. So something that was very important to me from the beginning and continues to be is how do we reach audiences where they are? What is the why every single day of the thing that we're doing? It's not enough to be excellent, especially for something as huge as a dance company. I mean, the resources are just tremendous. To endeavor to do something so large, it was important to be thinking, well, who are we truly serving? The assumption at the time was, well, you're a successful dance company, so of course you'll move to New York City, and that's what everyone does. And I kind of thought at the time, well, it's the most overserved dance community probably on the planet, and I didn't have worries about competition. I think people often assume maybe it was about that, but I think we would have done great. But I just thought, what's one more dance company in New York? And so let's address this idea of less appreciation for the arts in smaller communities, less support and education, by going to the people. And we had been touring to Boise, Idaho, for the final 2 years of the summer company. So we developed somewhat of an audience and following there, and just kind of found this kindred spirit. But core to going to that community was, how do we become vital in this community? How do we become a part of the fabric of daily life? Not, oh, it's nice to support the arts and you should have a dance company and that's very great, but how do we make a real difference? And it was a real experiment in audience engagement. And I would venture to say we were up there with the football team in terms of people's devotion and loyalty to the company. So we spent I'm not sure exactly, maybe 6 or 7 years as a resident company in that city. So that's the basic gist of the story.
So that's great. So you created obviously this very connectedness with that home base. You were touring. The company was company members, I'm assuming, were doing well. You had this national board of support. So then things evolved, as life does, and things change. So then what happened?
Well, there was a fall off in terms of my partners in this. Originally going to a full-time company, and Mueller decided to not be a part of it. And then, later on, John Michael Short also decided not to be a part of it. And in either case, I can't blame them. It's my original thought about what a behemoth the company is was correct, but I had no idea how correct. that would be, it was a lot. And so I was finding myself starting with diminishing returns, this entity that's created. So, from my perspective that I wanted to explore deeper and go further as a choreographer, wasn't supporting that anymore. The innovation that we had put forward in terms of how to be a company in a place was taking up all the air in the room. And, I think when you become a company that's known for innovation, you really can't stop being innovative. And there is a limited amount of human resource to be able to pull that off. And the day finally came when I realized my mental health was suffering greatly. It was a very personal decision. And, thankfully the people around me, board members especially, and senior staff were very clear on, listen, if this is not supporting the mission of this company, then this needs to not be happening anymore. And there was nothing frivolous about the decision. I'm not the kind of person who would approach it, well, it's not serving me anymore as an artist, so why do it? It truly was, I felt like it was killing me. It was killing my spirit for sure. And so I made a very difficult decision in some intense discussions with members of the board. But once that was clear, that was absolutely clear. And the feeling of like just openness and a reconnection to the why of wanting to do this company and was right there again. Because I would say to a certain extent, I'm better at audience engagement now than I was when I had the responsibility of all these people in the company. I'm more attached to it authentically. So yeah, there just came a moment where I wasn't capable anymore.
Yeah, it must have been exhausting.
Yes, endlessly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, and I want to loop back to some of the things that you've talked about in terms of the documentary and some of your other partners. And let's just start with kind of the logistics. Like once you had made that decision and you knew that you had the support around you, there are obviously things you need to think about in terms of dismantling this structure that you've built. There are the practical and logistical things. There are the kind of artistic vision things, and particularly with your name attached to it, that had to be just kind of angsty. And then there are the personal, the human, the emotional things, whether it's the people in Boise or the members of your company or, people that have been with you. So could you just share with us a little bit about kind of let's start with the practical and logistical, what were the actual steps that you took in making this shift happen, or what did others have to do alongside you?
In memory, it feels like such a tsunami because it was such a big thing to do. I won't have the order correctly, but I'm just going to tell you what I remember. It was a bigger job dismantling the company than it was putting it together. Because the putting together had gradual building blocks, and we were able to increase capacity as we saw that was possible. Going in the other direction, it has to happen very quickly. So, I think first and foremost on everyone's mind was it had to do with the employees of the company, communicating that information to them and helping them transition the best way we possibly could. We made the decision. So, a dance company season will generally go like a school year. We start in the fall and finish in the early summer. And for dancers, for example, for jobs, we'll usually audition, first part of the year. So, we wanted to make sure we were communicating this information to dancers before they were going to go off on their winter break and would be able to utilize that time to plan for themselves. At the same time, there were so many different relationships that we wanted to care for in that. A lot of supporters in the community that we wanted to make sure we were communicating in a respectful way. So, as much as everyone means well and you ask people to keep information to themselves, we knew good and well that this is information that would travel quickly. So we had to really tier those communications. And then, there's the nuts and bolts of, here's all the stuff in our space and what do we do with this stuff? And how do we, close out of the building. And another big thing had to do with fundraising for the remainder of the year. People in the community who had pledged support and support that we were counting on decided, there were oftentimes people decided to no longer fulfill those pledges. So, there's the near impossible task of fundraising when a company is closing and filling in gaps like that. So that's kind of the planning stage of it. Nothing ever really goes as planned. And in a situation like this, we did a lot of, very early on, even when this was a possibility before it was even a decision, we did a lot of group work with the company saying that on some level the structure of this company is going to change. And that may not involve everyone in the same way. And at that point, everyone was really on board and understanding, but there's no accounting for just the tidal wave of emotion that comes from an ending. It's a huge metaphor that's being played out. It's a death in a certain way. And so much stuff rises to the surface. And I think, especially in an arts organization dealing with creative people, that kind of thing is stirred to the surface all the time, but the volume was really turned up on it in the process. So really for me, the hardest part was, I think, while juggling all these near impossibilities just logistically, there was also all that emotional turmoil and stuff that's been brought to the surface, especially in a company where expression of that is actually welcomed. It was really I would say that 7 months was probably the hardest of my life. So I don't know if I totally answered your question, but that will give you some of the logistics.
Yeah, well, thank you. That must be difficult to go back and revisit. But then I'm also taken by the fact that you made a documentary about this process. So could you talk a little bit about that and what your impetus was? Was it conscious that you wanted to kind of have some kind of archive or gift, or was it a way for you to process, or all of the above? I mean, what was that all about and how did it happen?
Well, like many great ideas, it was in some ways by accident. A few years prior, we had begun a documentary project that was about my collaboration in New Orleans with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. And we'd done a Kickstarter fundraiser for it. And so it was it had been in process, and it was kind of a slow moving documentary. I think in some ways because the documentary wasn't there. So when the close of the company, let's see, it was June 30th, 2014 at 4:03 p.m. Was the last minute of the company functioning. I really just fell to my knees with so much gratitude that all the dancers got paid. We did every tour date, we got to the end and we did it well. I remembered, oh yeah, that documentary. And so I thought, okay, well, here we go. And I had to really change the course of that documentary to something I knew I could pull off. And that was the thing that was so of the moment. It was hard for people to understand the need to make this transition. I didn't fully understand it beyond my own just mental health around it. And so I knew I could be the most vulnerable and honest in talking about what was going on right at that moment. So I set right to just recording all that information as it would come out of my mouth as I thought of it. We had just, oodles of archival footage that had, just was sitting on the shelf doing nothing. So, it became a great therapeutic process to both lovingly speak of the time with the company and how special it was, but to also be quite honest about ending and about why it's okay to make the choice to end something when it's not in failure, why it's okay to make the choice to do something different when something is successful.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting, a mentor of mine once said, when you're in a job, it's best to leave when you're on top. You feel good about it, everyone else feels good about it. So there's some value to that. But The other thing I wanted to ask about, so is the documentary available? Can people see it now? Is it out there in the world?
Yeah, people can actually see it on my website. If they go to treycool.com, TREY cool.com, it's there and available under the film section.
Right, great. So you met all of your obligations, it sounds like, in terms of, as you said, to your presenters, to your staff, but still, I'm sure that you had to have backlash beyond, a couple of donors, withdrawing their pledges. So can you talk about how you navigated, some of the pushback or, people not understanding? You're so great, people love the work. What's wrong with it? Why would you do this? You know, what were those kinds of conversations like, or how did you manage that type of feedback?
It was very difficult. Yeah, it was very difficult. Because, it was a period of time where I wanted to honor the great work that we had done. And I don't mean laud it. I mean, I wanted to be in it and enjoy those last days. But really, it really happened through a lot of personal conversations, and a lot of times letting people vent their anger and say what they needed to say, because, there was no amount of explaining that would take away the heartbreak I think a lot of people were feeling. What a wonderful thing that we've become meaningful enough in that community that it would encourage heartbreak, that it had been that special. And the long term of that, though, I will say, is pretty great. Like, right now, Boise, Idaho is going through a lot of change and growth. They have a primary contemporary dance company that's run by one of the dancers from the company who stayed there and, filled that void. The new director of Ballet Idaho is also a former dancer from TMP. So, the effect of increasing the visibility around this forum, and also the people that were brought into that community who continue to feed it, have been really great. But, I think as it was happening, I'm a sensitive person. I'm an artist. That's part of why I do what I do, and I think part of why I do it well is that I have access to that feeling and that great empathy. And so it felt terrible to hear those things, and I had to keep reminding myself to take myself out of it. If I could really just see these things, through the lens of, this is a person, even though it doesn't sound great, this is a person being loving, and expressing their grief, then I could deal with it. And in that way, it was transformative for me, because I think any artist must get to the point where they can speak wholly from their point of view, barring any criticism, whether it be a decision of how one executes one's work or how they are in the world. You must be able to sit in the face of people being contrary to that, or you'll never make great work. And so, I think one of the things that's continued in me from that is this adherence to doing what I know is right in terms of how I'm going to express in the world. And sometimes that looks very contrary to other people's version, but so be it.
Authenticity, absolutely.
Yeah.
As you decided, when you're trying to think about a big change, I think whether it's in a relationship or with a job or, anything that's important and close to you, there's this swirl, as you said, the tsunami, of emotions going on. And for the folks who are with us today, I'd be interested in hearing you talk about, did you know when you made this decision, kind of what you were going to do next? In the before times, I think it was probably harder. Now that we've all been through COVID, where you really don't know what's going to happen, and I left my job like 3 months before COVID hit. So I felt like I was 3 months ahead of the rest of the world and stepping out into the unknown. But it's still a very scary thing to not know what ground's going to be under you, what you're going to do. Did you already have thoughts in mind about what you're going to do next? Or did you need this kind of neutral space in between the TMP time and what you're going to do next? And if so, how did you kind of use that time in that zone?
I think it was both things, because I was clear as an artist what I wanted to be focusing on, and I think probably how I would execute that. But exactly what that would look like. The noise of the company was so loud, it was impossible. It was day to day, taking my 100% and giving all my creative energy to the running of the company. So I really needed time, and it needed a lot of time. And I think, especially because the volume was so loud during those last 7 months, I had to step away and just be quiet. There's a certain level, and I don't use this term lightly, but there was a certain level of PTSD in that, it really didn't even take vacations for 10 years. It was so rare. And even when there was that time off, it would just be staring at the wall, because the brain it had to go nonstop in order to make this big thing work. And I'm not sure if this relates, but I think it's important. I think one of the big values is that I think to be an artist, for the most part, that comes from a childlike self. It's that place of unlimited possibility where you aren't thinking of the constraints of life. You're thinking beyond what is this world, what is bigger than us. And I think as a leader, you must be in your adult mind. It takes responsibility and a big picture kind of thinking. And I don't think those two things, at least in me, work well together in the same space. And I think that's what I learned most, and what I needed most was I need to be expressing in this world with a kind of wildness, I think, that the best thing comes out of me. So I think that's one of the big things I've taken away. And it took me a long time. I had to really, it was like crawling into the earth and just like letting the earth heal me. And all that, all that friction that came along with it, just like letting it exit. And it wasn't a quick transition, I'll say.
Well, and that's exactly that cycle, right? You grow, you expand, you die, and then you have to be reborn. So yeah, that kind of seed digging into the soil is a very apt analogy.
I hadn't even thought of it in that way. And it's interesting too, that you use the death metaphor, because, both of the works that I made in New Orleans were really about death and about the rituals around death. And the film is really around death. And I think, a big part of this was, and this is what I got from making the documentary, part of what I wanted to figure out in making the company, but also part of the difficulty in ending it, is our human struggle with that. And getting used to the idea that every single day is a death. We have moments of things growing and dying and growing and dying. And the more we get used to what feels like the chaotic nature of that, the greater peace we can have in this life. And the more control that we try to tamp down on, the more agitation that we create for ourselves. And so, I was lucky enough to have my hand held to the fire and like, do you really believe this? Like, I had to really go through it and face the stakes of it. And the positive effect of my life has been astronomical.
Go on.
Well, just it's to get it, to actually understand this is the nature of life, and any conflict that we have with that is simply to deny what is, and it's our own egoic, thinking that we have control, thinking that we're the God of the world, that we can, if I just, I had this so many different times. If I can just think, this is just in problem solving with the company, if I can just wrap my head around it a little bit harder, I'll figure it out. And there's some impossibilities, there's certain things that will just, either they don't work or they end, and you must take it and move on. And I think that informs my spirit as a choreographer. I mean, I think very simply, like if I'm in the studio, I make a movement phrase, you can waste 3 days being married to your first idea, trying to make it work, or you can immediately realize, oh, that needs to go away, and move on to the next thing, and have no marriage to it, have only a connection to the moment. It's a very Zen concept, isn't it? That if we could only focus on the moment, like what true happiness comes from that. And and I think if we just if you keep talking through all the permutations of that, it gets you back to death again. It's the value of that. It's the value of us having that as the culmination of our lives. It's finite.
Wow.
So the moment is so precious.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I know that part of your creative process is very improvisatory. In fact, I remember one time when you were in residence here at the Rialto in Atlanta, watching you improvisationally choreograph a short piece on that stage, and it was just fascinating. But that idea of kind of not detachment, but that you weren't married to particular things. So can you talk about how that kind of mindset or that nature that you have lent itself to this kind of process, or and probably still does today? But what does that kind of mindset do when you're making these kinds of big choices?
Yeah, it's all the same in a certain way. Like, you know, in choreography, you know, I tend to never prepare any movement. You know, maybe if something I know is going to be incredibly brainy and difficult, requires patterns or something, I may work it out. But, you know, I find that the truest thing is of the moment. You know, if I get anxiety and think I need to plan, it's always going to be material that I throw out. What I make in that moment is always the best thing. And so I think that's true in all things, as long as it's not coming from a place of fearfulness, as long as it's not coming from a place of like grasping, I will trust what's happening in that moment. When I lived in San Francisco, I studied just theatrical improv for a couple of years at the Bay Area Theater Sports, and it was like going to church. You know, the practice of learning to trust the exact moment, that thing that's going to come out of your mouth, and you know, when you could hit on it was so special. And so yeah, I think that happens in all my decision making. You know, I've learned at this point in my life that I also need to have some kind of structure operating out here, at least generally, so I'm not moving in 50 different directions at once. But like once I have that big picture structure, you know, allowing myself to be in the moment with all things and all decisions as best I can. I'm not a master of it by any means. That's been the best way to go.
Lovely, thank you. What as you were making these shifts, and were there other artists or examples that you looked to in terms of others who had not necessarily closed their company, but maybe so, but who have made these kinds of big decisions or shifts, and you felt that they were great examples for doing it in a way that was authentic, as you've said, and respectful and healthy? So were there people that you reached out to, you know, like kind of what did you gather around yourself that maybe helped you through the transition phase?
Yeah, I think both in the good and the bad. There were not really examples of other dance companies we could look to in the same way. There was one dancer who gave the feedback in gratitude, saying that the last company she had been in, she came to work one day and there was a note on the door saying we've closed the company, and that was that. And so, you know, that's definitely, you know, that yeah, that's terrible. I mean, you know, it certainly would have been a lot easier to have done it that way, but not a way that we wanted to treat these people. So that was really nice, but not really as an example ahead of time. My board chair, Blair Cutro, had been a part of more than one major company in the course of a merger. And that always means, you know, people moving on, people losing their jobs, you know, transitions in that way. And what was helpful from her perspective was to know how universal it is for everyone to freak out. You know, that's just, it's a very insecure time, no matter how well you handle it. And to just know, like, well, that's part of being an adult, is just to face that. It was a big lesson because it was very hard, but yeah, that was the greatest example for me, because I would have, you know, just because there had not been examples in the dance world that I could draw from, I would have immediately thought, oh, we're blowing this, we're doing a terrible job. But just to know that, like, no, that's how it's going to be. It was incredibly helpful.
Great. What would you say was the most positive thing that came out of this for you as an artist? Letting go of all the kind of administrative and public stuff. Just what was the best thing that came out for you as an artist?
Both from having the company and from choosing to end the company was this greater strength in following my own path. It was really about that. And even if it meant being less ambitious, really, I think as an artist, like, I remember being at School of the Arts and we all talked about our futures like we were going to own the world, that was the only way to do it. And I think I came away from it understanding like, well, if the work makes that kind of impact, great, but does not need to be the goal. Doesn't have to have anything to do with the goal. It's really about doing the best work you possibly can that's the truest to your one unique vision of the world. And the old one was the old way of thinking was hard to let go of, and we have so many in this world, we have so many affirmations that you must be the most famous, you must be number one. But to know that those are people in those positions are usually people who focus on being number one and not necessarily the best at what they do. And being your best is a lot more fulfilling. And sometimes that's quiet and sometimes that's small. And so, that transition gave me the confidence to be able to operate in that way.
Great. We're going to talk for about 5 more minutes or so, I think, with my questions, and then we're going to start to open up the chat. So if you're thinking about questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat if you would. Here's a question. So how do you, it sounds like you have become, you're obviously very comfortable in your own skin, and you've talked about needing to feel that you're living by your convictions. But there are always going to be, the naysayers, whether at that time or the work that you've been making since. So just for Trey, how do you handle that if you get the negative, why did you make this choice? Or, what you were doing was so good, why did you want to shift? How do you handle negative voices, whether they're internal or outside of yourself? Curious.
One of the big ways that's changed that I've had to learn was that the point is not being impervious to those voices. The point is not being made of steel. If someone says something that makes me feel a certain way, it makes me feel a certain way. If it's hurtful, it's hurtful. And one of the things I've had to learn how to do is just to feel hurt. And then to do nothing else about it other than have that feeling. And sometimes, if it's appropriate, if it's with a friend, if it's with someone who I feel I could hear it, I'll share that. Not, oh, you shouldn't have said what you said. More just like, it hurts my feelings to hear that. And not to negate anyone's position of saying that, not to even stop them from saying that, but to have my own experience of it as well. We've each you've shared your feelings about it, and I've shared mine, and that's that kind of helps that keep on moving on down the line. And and to also to your question, works for my own internal dialogue. Those self-criticisms come from somewhere as well. And so instead of just like, squishing them down and trying to distract myself, letting all that feeling of thought have its day. Maybe I need to make a documentary to process through it. But, to that point, a lot of that stuff is also really good fodder for making work. I find that people tend to respond to and resonate with the work more, the more I can come from the most personal place, the more I can have access to that stuff that makes me uncomfortable. So I've had to kind of make a relationship with those parts of myself.
Christine, do you find that when you do have those conversations with folks, does that change the nature of that relationship or that conversation? It just seems like that's, an opportunity. That's such an opportunity to offer to someone.
Yeah, indeed. I'm trying to think of a specific one because, obviously over time, those conversations happen less and less. Although I will say it's not like people don't object to different things that I do throughout life. But I find more and more if I'm able to answer someone honestly, they become more supple in their criticism and might find that they might reveal some internal prejudice that they didn't know they held on to. That's the ideal, it doesn't always play out that way, but I have had some really lovely conversations with people. I will say by example, a lot of my photography work deals with nudity. And I think there is a societally accepted rejection of anything. It's like we can say, well, that's bad because it's dirty, or we can just go right to that. And in many cases, yes, that can be true. But when I have an honest conversation with someone about my reasons for making the work that I make, I think a lot of times people's own prejudice floats to the surface, and they can be with me while they release that and maybe see things in a different way. They may have somewhat of a different relationship with their own body even after making that leap. And so in that way, it's quite wonderful and can feel transformative both ways.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. What are you thinking about today? Do you have other changes on the horizon? I mean, not to ask you to spill any beans, but just share with us where you're at now in terms of exploring some new things, or where you think your next steps are going to take you.
Yeah, I've been really immersed in this big photography project that I talked about earlier, and there's a big technology, there's a big curve there I'm trying to master, which is great because my geek brain can kind of chew on that a little bit. And then the thing that I'm really interested in dance right now is narrative work. It's not something I focused on a lot with TMP. But I think there's such a great need for it, especially in ballet companies. There's a great desire for that kind of work. And I've only made one full-length ballet in my life. I made a 3-act Peter Pan for Houston Ballet. And that was some time ago, and I really loved it. Really loved the outcome. It's a piece that's still performed frequently with companies, but it was such a beast that I shied away from doing another one. But it's like, what, 30 years later now, I'm ready for the next one. So if I could do one every 30 years, it's sure to be great. So that's my main focus at the moment.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I'm going to start to open it up, but I always like to end. Is there anything, Trey, that I didn't ask you about on the subject that you would love to just share that you haven't had a chance to yet?
That's a tough one. No, I don't think so. I mean, you have such great questions. I feel like we covered a lot.
Great. Well, thank you. Jean, do you want to do the chat, or shall I?
Yeah, no, I can jump in there. Thank you, guys. That was spectacular. And we do have one question that I've seen so far from Heather. And she asks, if you could time travel and talk to yourself 10 years ago, what's one nugget you wish was shared?
Oh, gosh. I could give you 100, probably. I mean, I would go back and just really calm myself and say that, as big as this is, it's not as big as you think it is. And really remind myself, especially my younger self, that you have something very unique and individual to share with the world. So believe in that and stick to that. And as much as a consensus builder as I've always tried to be, that sometimes sticking to your own guns is the way to go. I would have liked to have learned that lesson earlier.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great thing for everyone to hear. If there's anything else that people have, this is our chance. Please go ahead and type it in. Know that this will be available hopefully a week or so on our YouTube channel. We'll get the link out to everyone. So if you see your friends afterwards and you were like, hey, this was a really great discussion that I just saw with Trey and Mollie, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Well, have no fear. We'll be able to get it out to everyone coming up. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mollie.
I think Ashley has something that she wanted to chime in.
And thank you all so much. I swore that I would not comment, but Trey is one of my dearest friends, and I'm one of his biggest fans. There's my phone going off, being very unprofessional. Sorry. But what I wanted to say is, look, I've put in the chat, several articles. Look, there are not thousands, probably hundreds of articles about Trey's work since he disbanded. I mean, the fact that you can go through the New York Times just from the point that he ended Trey McIntyre Project, and even during the pandemic, he has been celebrated. And so I think that, he's a little too humble for him to say how well he's, done since then. And I would like to say on his behalf that, given the nature of this conversation and given that, we're talking about rebounding and, what you can do, by expressing your true authentic self, he's really shown and demonstrated, that one can pivot and just be a greater success than they ever thought than ever. And,
Wow.
the New York Times article doesn't demonstrate that, but it's just, it's there. I mean, it's the New York Times, there's that. And I want to thank Trey and Mollie and Heather for being here, and Jean, you too. And I will be quiet now. Sorry.
Oh, that's lovely, Ashley. Thank you. I want to put in one plug for one project on my website, treycool.com. One of the things I've been really interested in, and this is something that really came up big time during the pandemic, was helping to lift up artists and helping to expand their audience. And one really great thing that was garnered during the course of TMP was growing a pretty sizable international audience. So the website, although it does obviously have somewhat of a focus on my work, the main focus is on showing other artists' work. And so it's designed to be this kind of carnival that we say is led by Synergy. It's a search engine led by Synergy, where you can go on and you can explore and hopefully get turned on to artists in all mediums that you might not have heard of before. It's a really fun site. So if you go to treycool.com, that's a place you can go check out and get turned on to some new artists.
Wonderful, thanks. And Heather has a question. Are you surprised you're still talking about this 10 years later?
Yeah, I am surprised. I never would have thought, in the days of the closing, it just felt like, okay, if we can just get to this last day, it'll be over and done with. But, if you even look, like even during the pandemic, very few companies closed down. It doesn't happen very often. So I think it's somewhat of a unique thing that happened. And I don't blame anyone for that. It's hard to let go of something you've worked so hard for. But I didn't think, now we're going on 10 years later, I didn't think that this would still be a robust conversation. But as I said earlier, I'm still really interested in talking about it, because with perspective, things change over time, and I keep learning more the more I get to have conversations about it.
Well, I think it speaks to the interest that we have in again, someone, at a thriving level making a change and then continuing to thrive. It's just not something that we see all the time. Yeah. The arts administrator side of my brain just wants to ask this, because we do see that artist-led organizations have been and are shifting into a number of different modes. You don't just have to be the 501c3 with the board anymore. So given your experience kind of as a freelancer, with the company, is there anything that you would say to other artists about just, be looking at different structures, or are the old structures, should they be reconsidered and shelved? Is there anything about the structural piece that you think, I know it's a heavy thing to manage an organization on top of, being a world-renowned choreographer.
Yeah. I would have had probably a lot more to say about this 10 years ago. It's, that question is something I think less about, but I would say, at all ends, everything is worth re-exploring. There's so much change happening in the dance world for the better right now. A lot of it dancer driven, I have to say. Dancers just won't put up with the same crap that we did when I was a dancer. And that's wonderful. It's a good change. But I do think we take a lot of the traditional structure of a dance company for granted, because it's just always been done that way. And there's a lot of holes in it. I honestly wouldn't encourage any choreographer where their main focus is to really further their artistic vision, to be the sole director of their own company. I take that back. I think there are certain kinds of personalities that can do that quite well. I would just say, make sure you are that personality, that where you can really thrive in that situation, and enjoy that many plates spinning at once. I think a better relationship would be with, the term artistic director has really veered significantly from artistic production. And it seems to work best when an artistic director is an artistic curator and really has the, you know, the artistic lives being supported first in mind, but not the actual creation of work. And so, you know, I'd love to see a company like this that's a real partnership between someone who's more of a creative artist and one who's more of a creative manager. And additionally, an executive director position that's really handling the structural part of the company. Having those be like a three-tiered leadership model would be really great. And then, you know, I keep hearing about these dual artistic directorships, most namely Houston Ballet is endeavoring to do that. And I think it's a great idea. I think the artistic director role has ballooned and ballooned and ballooned to encompass so much that I think it's become too much for one person. But I do think, you know, I'll say it first. There's a great amount of ego being I'm the artistic director, and this supports me in my role as an artist in the world by being artistic director. And I think I don't know that it actually supports the end that one is looking for. And so I would encourage any artist to really take a deep dive and make sure that it's achieving what they would want to achieve.
Thank you very much. Well, I will thank Heather for making this conversation possible, and Jean for organizing it. And Jean, I'll pass it back to you. And Trey, I can't thank you enough. This has just been such a pleasure. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your memories. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Molly. I really loved talking to you. What a great conversation. Thank you.
It really was a great conversation, guys. I can't thank you all enough. It's a very cool thing that we were able to put together, and just thrilled that we could share it. And as I said, I know that it's going to live on. You guys did fantastic, and we can't thank you all enough. We're going to keep having these things come, and do not hesitate to reach out. Let us know what other things you want to see. We like getting interesting people together. One of the good things that has come out of the latest technology is that Trey can be in New York, Mollie can be in Atlanta, I can be in New Orleans, and y'all can be where you are, and we can all make it work for, you know, not an incredible amount of effort. So if you are curious about something and you want to see if we could put something together, do not hesitate to email us. It's at our website at elanola.org is our contact info. Until then, we're going to sign off. Thanks to everyone, and y'all have a lovely rest of your day.